The rope burned against Cordelia's wrists as she twisted desperately. Her 7-year-old sister Ophelia pressed against her side in the cramped wagon bed. The kidnappers had been riding hard for 3 days, their horses' hooves thundering across. The Missouri plains, like the devil himself, was giving chase. Which Cordelia prayed he was. "Please," she whispered through cracked lips as the wagon lurched to a sudden halt. "Can you take her instead of me?" Her voice broke as she pushed Ophelia forward with bound hands. "She's worth more. She's prettier, younger. I'm just 17 and too stubborn for any decent man." The bearded outlaw called Viper laughed, his gold teeth catching the dying sunlight. "Neither of you is going anywhere, Missy. Your daddy's got deep pockets, and we aim to empty them." That's when the first shot rang out. Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs as chaos erupted around them. Men shouted, horses screamed, and gunpowder smoke filled the air like morning fog. Through the haze, she saw him, a figure on horseback, tall and broad-shouldered against the crimson sky, his rifle speaking death with every pull of the trigger. Within minutes, it was over. 3 outlaws lay still in the dust, and Viper was on his knees, begging for mercy from the stranger who'd appeared like an avenging angel. The man dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs singing softly as he approached the wagon. Cordelia found herself staring into the most striking amber eyes she'd ever seen, set in a face weathered by sun and hardship but still devastatingly handsome. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, speaking of battles fought and won. "Maverick Ashford," he said simply, tipping his black hat. His voice was like whiskey over gravel, smooth but dangerous. "I've been tracking these men for 6 days." He cut their bonds with a knife that appeared and disappeared like magic, his fingers surprisingly gentle as they brushed against Cordelia's torn skin. She felt something electric pass between them in that touch, something that made her breath catch, and her pulse race for entirely different reasons than fear. "Thank you," she managed, pulling Ophelia close. "I'm Cordelia Whitmore, and this is my sister." Maverick's gaze lingered on her face, taking in her tangled auburn hair, dirt-streaked cheeks, and defiant green eyes. Something shifted in his expression, a hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the woman before him. "Your father's been offering a handsome reward," he said, though his tone suggested money was the last thing on his mind. "Figured I'd collect it personally." As he helped them down from the wagon, Cordelia felt the solid strength of his arms, smelled leather and sage and something uniquely masculine that made her knees weak. She'd never felt anything like this wild, reckless attraction that seemed to set her very soul on fire. "Where are you taking us?" she asked as he lifted Ophelia onto his horse. Maverick's smile was slow and devastating. "Home," he said. "Mine first. Then yours, if you want to go." The way he said it with such quiet confidence, such certainty, made Cordelia wonder if she'd just been rescued or claimed. And God help her, she wasn't sure which one she wanted more. 3 days later, Cordelia stood on the porch of Maverick's ranch house, watching him work with the horses in the corral. The Lazy Creek Ranch stretched as far as the eye could see, rolling hills dotted with cattle and wild flowers that danced in the prairie wind. It was beautiful, raw, and utterly untamed, much like its owner. "He ain't married, if that's what you're wondering," said a gravelly voice behind her. Cordelia spun around to find Jeremiah Pike, Maverick's foreman, leaning against the doorframe with a knowing grin. The weathered cowboy had taken a shine to Ophelia, whittling her toy horses and telling her tall tales about his adventures. "I wasn't wondering anything of the sort," Cordelia lied, her cheeks burning. Jeremiah chuckled. "Sure you weren't, miss. Just like he ain't been staring at you every chance he gets. Man's been walking around here like a lovesick calf for 3 days straight." Before Cordelia could respond, Maverick's voice cut through the air like a whip. Crack. A wild stallion had broken loose from the corral, its hooves striking sparks from the rocky ground as it charged straight toward where Ophelia sat playing in the dirt. Time slowed to a crawl. Cordelia's scream caught in her throat as she saw her sister look up, saw the terror in her wide blue eyes, saw death bearing down on tiny legs that couldn't possibly move fast enough. Then Maverick was there, diving from the corral fence in a motion so fluid it seemed choreographed by God himself. He swept Ophelia up in one arm and rolled, his body taking the impact as they tumbled out of harm's way. The stallion thundered past, missing them by inches. Ophi! Cordelia ran to them, her heart in her throat. Maverick sat up slowly, still cradling the little girl against his chest, his shirt torn and dust coating his dark hair. "I'm okay," Ophelia whispered, her small hands clutching his shirt. "Maverick saved me." The look that passed between the man and child in that moment broke something open in Cordelia's chest. There was tenderness there, protection, love, the kind of fierce devotion she dreamed of but never expected to see. "Thank you," she breathed, kneeling beside them. Without thinking, she reached out to touch the scrape on his cheek where he'd hit the ground. Maverick caught her wrist gently, his thumb stroking across her pulse point in a way that made her shiver. "I'd do anything to keep you both safe," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Anything." The weight of his words, the intensity in his amber eyes, made her dizzy. She found herself leaning closer, drawn by a force stronger than gravity, when Jeremir's pointed cough broke the spell. "Boss," the foreman said, "we got company riding in." Cordelia turned to see 3 riders approaching, their horses lathered with sweat. She recognized the lead rider immediately, her father, Beaumont Whitmore, his silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun and his face set in lines of fury and determination. "Cordelia!" He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward them with the commanding presence that had made him one of the most powerful men in 3 counties. "Thank God you're safe." But as his gaze moved from his daughters to Maverick, something cold and calculating entered his expression. "Mr. Ashford, I presume. I've come to collect my daughters and pay the promised reward." Maverick stood slowly, setting Ophelia on her feet but keeping one protective hand on her shoulder. The tension between the 2 men was immediate and electric. Like the moment before lightning strikes. "They're welcome to stay as long as they like," Maverick said evenly. Beaumont's eyes narrowed. "That won't be necessary. We'll be leaving within the hour." "No." The word escaped Cordelia's lips before she could stop it, surprising everyone including herself. The silence that followed, Cordelia's defiant no, stretched taut as a bowstring ready to snap. Her father's face flushed crimson above his perfectly groomed beard, while Maverick's expression remained carefully neutral, though she caught the flash of satisfaction in his amber eyes. "Cordelia Rose Whitmore," her father's voice boomed across the ranch yard, sending several chickens scattering. In alarm, "you will not speak to me in such a manner. We are leaving, now." "I'm 17, Papa," Cordelia said, lifting her chin with the same stubborn pride that had gotten her into trouble countless times before. "Old enough to make my own choices. You're my daughter, and you'll do as I say." Beaumont's hand moved to rest on the pearl handle of his Colt revolver, gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone present. The air crackled with tension as Maverick stepped forward, his own hand moving with casual precision to his gun belt. When he spoke, his voice was deceptively calm. "Mr. Whitmore, I suggest you remove your hand from that weapon. Your daughters are under my protection now, and I take that responsibility seriously." "Your protection?" Beaumont laughed harshly. "You're nothing but a gunfighter with delusions of respectability. I know your reputation, Ashford. The Scarred Wolf of Colorado, they called you. How many men have you killed?" "Enough," Maverick replied without flinching. "All of them deserved it." Cordelia felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd suspected there was violence in Maverick's past. You didn't get a scar like his from falling off a horse, but hearing it confirmed made her father's next words sting all the more. And you think I'd let my daughter throw her life away? On a man with blood on his hands? A man who kills for money? I kill to protect what's mine, Maverick said, his gaze finding Cordelia's. And I've never charged a fee for that. The possessive way he said, "What's mine," should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through her veins like liquid fire. She took a step closer to him, her decision crystallizing like ice on a winter window. "Papa," she said quietly, "you taught me to judge a man by his actions, not his past. Maverick saved our lives. He's fed us, sheltered us, protected us. Can you say the same about yourself these past few months?" Beaumont's face went white. She'd struck home with that barb his increased drinking, his neglect of family while chasing business deals, his failure to prevent their kidnapping in the first place. "How dare you?" "She's right." The small voice belonged to Ophelia, who stepped out from behind Maverick to face their father with surprising courage. "You're always gone, Papa. Always angry. Maverick reads me stories and taught me to whistle and makes me laugh. Why can't we stay?" For a moment, Beaumont Whitmore looked genuinely stricken. Then his expression hardened into something cruel and calculating. "Very well. But when this backfires, when he shows his true nature and breaks your heart, don't come crying to me." He turned on his heel and stalked toward his horse, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Oh, and Cordelia, don't expect a penny of your inheritance. Dead to me means dead to my fortune as well." As her father and his men rode away in a cloud of dust and bitter words, Cordelia felt a weight lift from her shoulders she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. For the first time in years, she was free to choose her own path. "You realize what you've done?" Maverick asked quietly, moving to stand beside her. He meant what he said about the inheritance. Cordelia turned to face him, drinking in the harsh beauty of his scarred features, the strength in his weathered hands, the gentle way he looked at her sister. "Do you think I care about his money? Most women would. I'm not most women." Maverick's smile was slow and devastating. "No," he agreed, reaching up to tuck a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "You're not." As the sun set over the Missouri plains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Cordelia felt something new blooming in her chest. It was wild and reckless and utterly terrifying, but for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. 2 weeks passed like a dream wrapped in golden prairie sunlight. Cordelia threw herself into ranch life with the same fierce determination that had defined her entire existence. She learned to milk cows, gather eggs, and cook meals hearty enough to feed a crew of hungry cowboys. Her soft hands developed calluses, her pale skin bronzed from the sun, and her spirit soared with a freedom she'd never known existed. But it was the evenings that truly undid her. After supper, when Ophelia had been tucked into the little bed Maverick had built for her in the spare room, Cordelia and Maverick would sit on the porch swing and watch the stars emerge like scattered diamonds across the vast Missouri sky. They talked about everything and nothing, her dreams of adventure, his plans for expanding the ranch, their shared love of books and music and the wild beauty of the frontier, and sometimes, when the conversation lulled and the night air hummed with possibility, he would look at her with such hunger in his amber eyes that she felt like she might catch fire from the inside out. Tonight was different. Tonight, the air itself seemed charged with electricity as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Maverick had been quieter than usual during supper, his gaze following her movements with an intensity that made her pulse race. "Storm's coming," he said as they settled onto the porch swing, the first rumbles of thunder rolling across the plains like the voices of ancient gods. "I can feel it," Cordelia whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure. They were talking about the weather anymore. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating Maverick's profile in stark relief. The scar that ran from temple to jaw stood out like silver thread against his tanned skin, and Cordelia found herself wondering, not for the first time, what had put it there. "Tell me about Colorado," she said softly. "About the man they called the Scarred Wolf." Maverick's jaw tightened. "That's not a story for gentle ears." "Good thing mine aren't gentle." She turned to face him fully, drawing one leg up beneath her on the swing. "I chose you, Maverick. All of you. That includes your past." The thunder grew closer, and with it, the first fat drops of rain. Maverick stood abruptly, beginning to pace the length of the porch like a caged predator. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "I was 19 when it happened, working security for a mining operation outside Denver. The owner was a bastard named Cromwell who thought he could treat his workers like slaves and his women like property." His hand moved unconsciously to his scar. "One night he decided he wanted the daughter of one of his miners. A girl barely 16, sweet as spring water and twice as pure." Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the house to its foundations. Rain began falling in earnest now, drumming against the tin roof like bullets. "I tried to stop him legally first," Maverick continued, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Talked to the sheriff, the mayor, anyone who would listen. But Cromwell owned them all. So when I found him in that girl's cabin one night, forcing himself on her while her father lay bleeding on the floor." He stopped pacing, gripping the porch railing so hard his knuckles went white. "I killed him, bare hands. But not before he got me with his knife." Cordelia's heart clenched as she imagined a younger Maverick, barely more than a boy himself, fighting to protect an innocent girl's honor. "What happened after?" "Cromwell's men came for me. All 8 of them. I had to kill them too, it was them or me, and I'd made a promise to that girl's father that I'd see her safe." His bitter laugh was lost in another rumble of thunder. "Word spread fast after that. The Scarred Wolf, they called me. The man who'd killed 9 men in one night to protect a woman's virtue." Rain was blowing onto the porch now, misting around them like tears from heaven itself. Cordelia stood and moved to where Maverick gripped the railing, placing her hands over his. "And the girl?" she asked gently. "Married a good man the next spring. Has 3 children now, last I heard." His amber eyes found hers, fierce and vulnerable. "At the same time, that's who I am, Cordelia, a killer. A man with blood on his hands and violence in his heart. Your father was right to warn you away." Instead of recoiling, Cordelia stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, to see the gold flecks in his storm-dark eyes. "That's who you were," she corrected softly. "A hero, a protector. A man who sacrificed his own peace to save someone who couldn't save herself." The storm chose that moment to unleash its full fury, sending sheets of rain across the porch and driving them back against the house. But neither of them moved. They stood frozen in the space. Between one heartbeat and the next, the air around them crackling with more than just electricity. "Cordelia," Maverick breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. Then his hands were framing her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones with reverent tenderness. And she knew with crystalline clarity that nothing would ever be the same again. Kiss, when it came, was like being struck by lightning and embraced by sanctuary all at once. Maverick's lips were firm and warm against hers, tasting of coffee and promises and something uniquely him that made her head spin. Thunder crashed overhead as if the very heavens were applauding their union, and rain pounded the earth around them like a benediction. Cordelia had been kissed before clumsy, stolen kisses from boys at church socials and county fairs, but this was something altogether different. This was a claiming, awakening, a recognition that she belonged to this man as surely as he belonged to her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she felt fundamentally changed. "I love you," she whispered against his lips, the words torn from her soul by the storm's fury. "I've loved you since the moment you cut my bonds and looked at me like I was something precious." Maverick's response was another kiss, deeper this time, more desperate. His hands tangled in her rain-dampened hair as he pressed her back against the wall of the house, and she could feel the thunder of his heartbeat matching her own. "Marry me," he said roughly, the words barely audible above the storm. "Tomorrow. Tonight. I don't care about proprieties or your father's blessing or anything else. Just marry me, Cordelia." "Yes," she breathed without hesitation. "Yes, yes. 1,000 times yes." They might have stayed there forever, lost in each other and the wild magic of the storm, if not for the sound of horses approaching through the rain. Maverick tensed immediately, his hand moving to his gun as he stepped protectively in front of Cordelia. Through the sheets of rain, they could make out 3 riders approaching the house at a hard gallop. As they drew closer, Cordelia's heart sank as she recognized the lead horse, her father's prize stallion, Tempest. But it wasn't her father who dismounted in their yard. It was Quintus Morgrave, her father's business partner and the man who'd been pressuring Beaumont to arrange a marriage between himself and Cordelia for the past 2 years. Quintus was everything Maverick was not, soft where the rancher was hard, pale where he was bronzed, cruel where he was kind. At 45, he was nearly old enough to be her father, with thinning hair, cold gray eyes, and hands that had never known honest work. "Miss Whitmore," he called out, his voice cutting through the rain like a blade. "I've come to collect you. On behalf of your father." "She's not going anywhere," Maverick said, his voice deadly calm as he stepped forward. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat, casting shadows across his scarred face that made him look like an avenging angel. Quintus laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "I'm afraid that's not your decision to make, Ashford. Cordelia is promised. To me, has been for 6 months now." The world tilted sideways around Cordelia. "What?" "Could be," agreed a new voice from the edge of the yard. "But it ain't." Every head turned to see Jeremiah Pike emerge from the barn, leading a saddled horse and wearing the grim expression of a man bearing heavy news. "Ryder came in about an hour ago," he said quietly. "Beaumont Whitmore is dead. Hart gave out yesterday evening, not long after he signed this here will in front of 3 witnesses at the bank in town." The words hit Cordelia like a physical blow. Whatever else her father had been, distant, controlling, stubborn to a fault, he had been the only parent she'd ever known. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced them back. There would be time for grief later. Now she had to be strong. "That changes everything," Sheriff Cray said grimly. "Miss Cordelia, as the eldest daughter and primary beneficiary, you're now free to make your own choices regarding marriage." "I choose him," she said without hesitation, moving to stand beside Maverick. "I choose love over duty, freedom over security, and the unknown over the comfortable lie." "But the murders," Quintus started desperately, "were committed in defense of his property and guests," Sheriff Cray interrupted. "I've heard testimony from 6 different sources about what happened here last night, Mr. Morgrave. How you came onto this man's land with armed men, threatened 2 women under his protection, and drew weapons first. In this territory, that's called self-defense." As the sheriff and his deputies prepared to leave, taking a protesting Quintus with them, Cordelia found herself alone with Maverick and Ophelia in the golden morning light. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and bright with possibility. "So," Maverick said quietly, his amber eyes warm with love and laughter, "you still want to marry a scarred old gunfighter?" "More than anything," she whispered, going into his arms as if she'd been born to be there. "But I have one condition. Anything. We build a good life here. Not just for us, but for Ophelia, and for any other lost souls who need a place to call home." She looked up at him through her lashes. "Think the Lazy Creek Ranch is big enough for that kind of dream?" Maverick's answer was a kiss that tasted of coffee and promises and forever. Around them, the Missouri wind sang through the prairie grass, carrying the sound of their laughter to the very edges of the sky. They were married that Sunday in the little church in town, with Ophelia as maid of honor and half the territory in attendance. Some came out of curiosity, some out of respect, and some out of genuine affection for the couple, who had chosen love over convention and found their happily ever after in the process. Years later, when their own children asked about how their parents met, Cordelia would tell them about a desperate little girl's plea that had changed 3 lives forever. How sometimes the best way to save someone is to save yourself first. And how love, real love, always finds a way. The Lazy Creek Ranch became legendary throughout the territory, not just for its fine horses and cattle, but as a place where anyone could find sanctuary. Orphaned children, battered women, men trying to escape their violent pasts, all found welcome at the Ashford table. And at the heart of it all were Maverick and Cordelia, their love growing stronger with each passing season, proving that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simplest question: "Can you take her instead of me?" The answer, as it turned out, was always the same: "I'll take you both." "Your father didn't tell you?" Quintus's smile was serpentine. "How unfortunate. Our engagement was arranged as part of a business agreement. Your father's debts are ... substantial. The only way to save the family estate was through marriage. Our marriage." "No," Cordelia breathed, her hand instinctively reaching for Maverick's arm. "Papa wouldn't, he couldn't." "Oh, but he could and he did." Quintus pulled a folded document from his coat, seemingly unbothered by the rain soaking through his expensive clothes. "All legal and binding. Your father's signature is right there." Maverick's entire body had gone statue still, but Cordelia could feel the violence coiled within him like a spring wound too tight. She said no. He growled, "That's the end of it." "Actually, it's not." Quintus's 2 companions, hired guns by the look of them, moved to flank him, their hands resting meaningfully on their weapons. "Miss Whitmore is coming with me tonight. The wedding is scheduled for Sunday. Over my dead body," Maverick snarled. "That can be arranged," Quintus replied pleasantly. The standoff might have escalated into bloodshed right there, in the muddy yard, if not for the small voice that cut through the tension like a knife through silk. "Cordelia?" Ophelia stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her nightgown white as an angel's wings. "What's happening? Why are those men here?" The sight of the little girl seemed to deflate some of the violent tension in the air. Quintus's predatory gaze moved to Ophelia, and something even colder entered his expression. "Ah yes, the sister. Don't worry, my dear. There's room in my household for both Whitmore daughters. I'm sure we can find suitable arrangements for you as well." The way he said it, with such oily satisfaction, made Cordelia's skin crawl. But it was Maverick's reaction that truly terrified her. She felt him go from coiled violence to pure, deadly fury in the space of a heartbeat. "Run," he told her quietly, never taking his eyes off Quintus. "Take Ophelia and run, now." But even as the words left his lips, they all knew it was too late. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. The rain continued to fall, washing away their dreams like chalk from a schoolhouse slate. What happened next would be talked about in saloons and general stores across 3 counties for decades to come. One moment, Maverick Ashford was standing on his porch facing down 3 armed men in defense of the woman he loved. The next, he was death incarnate, moving with a speed and precision that defied human comprehension. The first gunman never cleared leather. Maverick's Colt appeared in his hand as if conjured by dark magic, spitting fire and thunder. The man dropped like a stone into the muddy yard, his unfired weapon spinning away into the darkness. The second gunman managed to draw but never got the chance to aim. Maverick's second shot took him center mass, spinning him around like a child's top before he collapsed beside his companion. Quintus himself had frozen at the first gunshot, his face gone white as fresh snow. His hand shook as he slowly raised both arms in surrender, the marriage contract falling from nerveless fingers to dissolve in the rain. "Please," he stammered. "I have money. More than you could ever." "You threaten what's mine," Maverick said, his voice colder than a Dakota winter. The smoking barrel of his gun never wavered from Quintus's heart. "That's not something money can fix. Maverick, no." Cordelia's voice cut through the red haze of his rage. She stepped between them, heedless of the danger, her green eyes blazing. "With determination. He's not worth your soul." For a long moment, the only sounds were the drumming of rain and Quintus's ragged breathing. Then Maverick slowly lowered his weapon, though his finger remained on the trigger. "Get out," he said quietly. "Take your dead and get off my land. If I ever see you again, if you ever come near Cordelia or Ophelia again, I'll kill you slow." Quintus didn't need to be told twice. With shaking hands, he helped load the bodies of his hired guns across their horses, then mounted his own steed with the awkward haste of a man fleeing the devil himself. "This isn't over," he called back as he spurred his horse into the night. "The law will hear about this." "Let them come," Maverick replied, but his words were lost in the storm dot as the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. The three of them stood in the rain: Cordelia, Maverick, and little Ophelia, who had watched the entire confrontation with the wide-eyed solemnity of a child who had seen too much too young. "Is it over?" Ophelia asked in a small voice. "No, little one," Maverick said gently, scooping her up in his arms despite the rain. "Men like Quintus don't give up easy. But I promise you this, no one will ever hurt you or your sister while I draw breath." "What about Papa?" Ophelia whispered. "What about the paper that said Cordelia had to marry the mean man?" Cordelia and Maverick exchanged glances over the child's head. They both knew that Quintus would be back with the law, armed with her father's signature and the full weight of legal authority. In the eyes of the world, she belonged to Quintus Morgrave whether she wanted it or not. "We'll figure it out," Cordelia said, though her heart was heavy with the knowledge that their choices were few and none of them good. Somehow. But as they stood there in the storm, united against the world and all its cruelties, she felt something stronger than fear growing in her chest. It was hope, wild, reckless, and utterly unquenchable. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had washed the world clean. Cordelia woke to the sound of horses in the yard and the low murmur of unfamiliar voices. Her heart sank as she recognized the voice of Sheriff Nathaniel Cray, a man she'd known since childhood and one of the few lawmen in the territory who couldn't be bought. Dressing quickly, she made her way to the kitchen where she found Maverick, calmly drinking coffee and cleaning his rifle. He looked up as she entered, and she was struck by how peaceful he seemed, like a man who had made his choice and found comfort in it. "They've come for me," he said simply. Through the window, she could see the sheriff and his deputies surrounding the house. Behind them, looking smug and self-satisfied despite the bruise on his temple, where he'd fallen in his haste to escape the night before, stood Quintus Morgrave. "There's a warrant," Sheriff Cray called out, "for the murders of Jasper Finn and Cole Brantley. Come out with your hands up, Maverick. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Maverick set down his coffee cup and looked at Cordelia with such love in his amber eyes that it took her breath away. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Don't you dare, she whispered, fiercely. Don't you dare talk like this is goodbye. His smile was sad but genuine. Sometimes loving someone means making the hard choice, even when it breaks your heart. Before she could stop him, he was walking toward the door, his hands raised, in surrender. And Cordelia knew, with the crystal clarity that comes with true desperation, that if she didn't act now, she would lose him forever. Wait! Cordelia's voice rang out across the yard as she burst through the front door, Ophelia close behind her. Every eye turned to her, the sheriff surprised, Quintus calculating, Mavericks fierce with warning. Don't do this, Cordelia, Maverick said quietly. Whatever you're thinking. Sheriff Cray, she interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of generations of Whitmore women who had never learned to bow their heads. Before you arrest this man, I have something to say. Nathaniel Cray had known her since she was a gap-toothed girl stealing apples from his orchard. Now he tipped his hat respectfully, though his hand remained on his weapon. Miss Cordelia, I'm afraid this is official business. So is this. She pulled a folded paper from her dress pocket, not the soggy marriage contract that had dissolved in last night's rain, but something else entirely. This is my father's will, Sheriff. The real one, not the forgery Mr. Morgrave has been showing around town. Quintus went pale as fresh snow. That's impossible. Beaumont destroyed the original. Did he? Cordelia's smile was sharp as winter wind. Or did he simply tell you he had while keeping the real document safe in his private study? The one that leaves everything to his daughters, with the stipulation that Ophelia's inheritance passes to me should anything happen to him? The silence, stretched taut as bowstring. Sheriff Cray frowned, studying the document Cordelia held out to him. This appears authentic, he said slowly. Same paper, same ink, same seal as the other legal documents in your father's possession. Check the dates, Cordelia pressed. This will is dated 3 months after the supposed marriage contract, which means any previous agreements are null and void. Sheriff Cray finished, understanding dawning in his weathered features. Beaumont couldn't legally promise you in marriage after signing away his paternal rights. Quintus sputtered like a tea kettle coming to boil. This is preposterous. That document could be forged.